This is a series about tension. I think most of us want to resolve the tension in our lives. Tension typically doesn't feel great. So a lot of times when tensions come about in our lives, rather than dealing with the tension and embracing the tension, we try to get rid of the tension as quickly as we can. And so we're trying to just bring to the surface these uncomfortable but essential tensions in our lives, both as people, as individuals who are following Jesus, and then also as a church, as a body of believers who believe that there are some tensions that need to exist in order for us to grow and be the church that God's created us to be. So let me give you some examples of when I talk about the tensions that we have to manage, the tensions that we have to deal with in our own lives. If you have a job and have a family, you have felt the tension of work life and home life. Right, that's an and, it's not an or. If you choose work over family or family over work, then you're losing something valuable and essential. So in our own lives, work and home life, it's a tension that we have to learn to navigate. When we talk about our personal lives, when we start thinking about money for vacations and then money that we save for the long term. Right, it's a tension that we want to do both. We want to make memories with kids now. I also would like to have some money for my kids to eventually go to college. I would like to be able to retire eventually. So that and is a tension of money that I need now and want to use now for our family to make memories, and money for the long term for savings and college and all the big things that are coming up. That's a tension that we have to manage. Those two might not have hit home, so this one will. I like tacos and pizza, right? I also want to be healthy and live a long life. Right, that's not an either or. If you're an or person and you've given up pizza and tacos, I want to encourage you to embrace the tension that you can do and pizza and tacos and still be healthy, work out, find a good rhythm of life as it relates to your health and your eating habits. So there are these ands throughout our life. We're trying to isolate some that really have to do with the church. And last week, Terrell talked about the tension of family and mission, that we could very easily choose family and say, hey, we're going to take care of each other. We're going to kind of close the doors and make sure that everybody here is good. And if we do that at the expense of mission, that God's family has always existed for those who are not yet in the family, if we lose that, then we've let go of an important thing that God has for us. We're both family and mission. And so the and that I want to talk about today, and it really picks up on what Terrell talked about last week, I want to talk about being the church, both gathered and scattered. We as a church are called to gather. For example, what we're doing right now, we gather together in settings. When I was a kid, we said, I'm going to go to big church. Right? This is big church. We go to church. And then as I got older, a lot of my friends who became kind of disenchanted with big church, with the gathering, they started talking about, we're going to go be the church. Right? Instead of it just being a Sunday morning thing, we think the Bible's calling us to be the church. Right? Which one of those is right? And we would say, obviously from the title of the series, both. We are called to gather as God's people and to scatter, to go into the city and into the world to make disciples. And so I want to just talk about that for a little while this morning and really talk about how and why we do it and what it looks like for us at Mosaic. But the best illustration I can give you, about 2 years ago, my wife, for my birthday, got me an iWatch. The reason that she got me the iWatch is partially because she loves me and wants me to have a nice watch. More than that, it's because when she texts me during the day, about 90% of the time, my phone is on Do Not Disturb mode. It's not because I don't care about you. It's not because I don't love you. It's because I'm in a lot of meetings. I'm in a lot of counseling appointments, and I don't want to be the guy always looking at my phone in the middle of a conversation. So a lot of times, I put it on Do Not Disturb. And to be completely honest, a lot of times I forget that it's not on Do Not Disturb. And then I have text after text after text that I find later. And for the most part, my wife understands that. But at one point, she said, Kyle, what if it's an emergency? What if I've called you over and over again and you ignore me and you ignore me? What if I really need you someday? What am I going to do? And then she discovered there's the iWatch that makes the text not only come to your phone, but it'll shake your wrist over and over and over again until you pay attention to it. And so she said, if I get you an iWatch, will you pay attention to it? Will you at least look at it during the meeting? That way you don't pull your phone out and someone thinks you're rude and don't care about their problems. But you can also, if the house is burning down or if I lose a kid or whatever may happen, you're not out of the loop that something important is going on in my life as well. So she got me the watch. I appreciate the watch. I sometimes put the watch on Do Not Disturb mode, but we'll deal with that later. But when I got the watch, there's a little feature to it that I didn't know I was getting when I got it. Every now and then, usually 2 or 3 times a day, the watch pops up this little notification. I'm going to put it on the screen. You iWatch people will recognize it. I didn't know that when I bought my iWatch, 2 or 3 times a day, my watch was going to tell me to breathe. I didn't know I needed that, right? But 2 or 3 times a day, the watch tells me to breathe. And when I first got the watch, it would pop up and I would see it and think, how dumb is that? Like, I've been breathing since the moment I was born. I've never stopped breathing. I've never had this issue of needing to be reminded to breathe. So I would just hit ignore, and then it would pop up a few more times. I would mean to turn it off. I know you can turn the settings off so it doesn't keep bugging you, but I would forget. And then one day, I accidentally hit start instead of ignore. And if you've ever hit start on the Breathe app, what it does for a minute, it slows you down, it has this little rhythm to it, and over the course of a minute, it has you take 7 deep breaths. So it'll make you breathe in really, it'll say breathe slow, and you feel like you've got your own little yoga instructor on your wrist that's instructing you how to breathe, but it says take a deep breath, breathe in, and breathe out. And I went from, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, to about halfway through thinking, this is kind of nice. Like, I actually kind of feel like I can feel like oxygen, and this kind of feels nice. And I discovered, I don't do it very often, I ignore it more than not, but what I discovered is maybe I did need the reminder that there are times in the course of the day that I need to stop and breathe. Maybe, even though I've been breathing all my life, this reminder to breathe in and breathe out is more important than I thought. And when we get to the church, the same pattern that God has wired us for biologically, to breathe in and breathe out, did you know that's the pattern of the church? That we as God's people are meant to breathe in, to draw near to God, to let Him draw us near and speak into us the life and the power that He has for us, and then breathe out. We're going to be studying the book of Acts here in about 5 weeks, and you're going to get to see this over and over again. But there's this pattern to the life of Jesus, and then this pattern of the early church, and that was it. They were breathed in, brought near to the heart of God, transformed by His presence, and then breathed out all over the world. Over and over and over again, this pattern emerged of inhaling and exhaling. And so I want to talk about gathering and scattering, and I want you to see this. Look at Acts chapter 2. This happens early on in the life of the church. No one tells them to do this, but this breathe in, breathe out, this inhale, exhale, gather, scatter pattern develops early on. And I want us to talk about a little bit about why it did and what is happening in these gatherings, and then how it impacts the way we do church here at Mosaic. So this is Acts chapter 2. We're going to just look at verses 46 and 47. We're not going to spend a ton of time here because, like I said, we're going to preach through Acts here starting in about 5 weeks. We'll go way deeper. But I want you to see, this is the early church, Acts 2. This is the day of Pentecost. 3,000 people have been added to the family of God. Peter preaches this sermon, and the church explodes. And then it begins to describe the early church, what they did, why they did it, some of the main things that they were focused on. And it says this, and day by day, so that alone, I won't spend a ton of time there, but notice it doesn't say, and on Sundays. Right, it says, and day by day, there's daily activity that was the life of the church. It wasn't just Sunday gatherings. Day by day, it was an everyday thing, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes. Do you note 2 locations that Luke is pointing out in the book of Acts? That every day, he says, partially the church was gathering in the temple courts to get your mind around it. The temple was the large space where a lot of them could gather. In those days, the apostles, those who had seen Jesus' life, were told they were doing the apostles' teaching. In other words, those who had seen and heard and watched Jesus live are now standing in front of 3,000 people telling them the things that they saw him do and taught and heard him teach. They're passing off the life of Jesus in this large group setting. They're worshiping together. They're gathering together. So a large group, the temple together, and then breaking bread in their homes. And listen to how it describes that. And they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. It's this daily thing that there's 2 very distinct locations described, a gathering, a larger group where they all came together and had some specific things that they did, and then a scattering where it says house by house, the city of Jerusalem, house by house, has the church breathed back out and spread out all over the place. So that the city of Jerusalem was infected by these Christians who would go out and in their homes, having meals together, praying together. The city begins to be transformed by the breathing in of the church and then the breathing back out to be in the city and to be the church for the people in their neighborhoods. And so I want to talk about that for a moment. How and why Has God called us to scatter? What does it look like? What does it mean when we, quote, go to church? What are we doing here this morning? Right, and then I want to talk about what it looks like when we scatter even more so. I'm assuming that if you showed up for church on Sunday morning at 10:30, that you're already pretty bought into the gathering thing. But I want to talk about what it looks like for us to scatter. Because we talk all the time about our church being a place where we want to see God's kingdom come to Nacogdoches. We want to see heaven invade our city. And as much as I wish that would just happen here and it would be easy for us to gather everyone here, I think the city's going to be transformed not just by our gathering, but it's the scattering part, just like in Jerusalem. As we take what we get here, as God breathes us in here and then breathes us back out to the city, that we're actually going to begin to see neighborhoods and businesses and dorms transformed by us being the church in the city. So let's look at this for a minute. What does it look like for us to gather, and what does it look like for us to scatter? And before we go to those two, just for a moment, I want you to see this in Jesus' life. So before the church was doing it, Jesus was doing it. A lot of times when you read the stories of Jesus, if you've ever read the Gospels, most people are very familiar with the advance the kingdom moments in Jesus' life, the great power stories, the great miracles. So you read the stories in the Gospels, and most of us from Sunday school on as little kids know these stories about feeding the 5,000 and raising the dead and healing the leper. Like there's these amazing stories of power that Jesus does. What we often miss is that there's a second part to the pattern, right? We know the advance the kingdom stories, but I want to show you just 3 examples out of many of the pattern in Jesus' life. That Jesus advanced the kingdom powerfully because he retreated. It says that he pulled away to these desolate places to be breathed in by the Father, right? Jesus, who is God, right, needed to withdraw to be breathed in by the Father so that he could advance with power. So let me show you this in 3 different passages. I want you to see Jesus even needing this breathing in, breathing out, inhale, exhale, gather, scatter pattern to his life. This is Mark 1. This will be on the screen behind me. I just want you to see Jesus doing works of power, but the gospel writers recognized where the power was coming from. Jesus was with the Father, and then it overflowed everywhere he went. Look, Mark chapter 1, verse 32. It says, that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. The whole city was gathered together at the door. So this is one of those amazing stories of Jesus transforming a city, a great work of power. He healed many who were sick with various diseases. He cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Then look at what the next verse says. And rising very early in the morning while it was still dark, he departed and he went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said, everyone is looking for you. This is the beginning of Mark's gospel, and you can see the disciples' confusion. He goes into a city, transforms it by these works of power, these miracles that they'd all been longing to see happen for a long time. And they see everything they've been longing for, and then they look for Jesus, and he's gone. And they search for him, and they finally find him. And it says that he had retreated to a desolate place. He had gone to this place where he could be breathed in and have time with his Father, that the time that he had with his Father in retreat would then prepare him for advance. Do you see that? The pattern of Jesus' life was, I need to retreat to receive from the Father and to be with the Father so that I can go in power and advance the kingdom of God. And it was the pattern over and over again, retreat to be with the Father, advance to make the Father known everywhere I go. Look again, there's another passage. This is Luke chapter 5, verse 15 and 16. Jesus has just cleansed a leper, right? Another great work of power. And it says, but now even more the report about him went abroad, and great crowds gathered to hear him and to be healed of their infirmities. But he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. And again, you can see the tension building in the disciples. They keep going to Jesus saying, isn't this what you want? Don't you want people to know about you? If you're the Son of God, if you're the Messiah, shouldn't everybody know? And shouldn't you be trying to get as many people as possible, as often as possible? And Jesus would then just pull away again to the desolate place and pray. John chapter 16, this is after the feeding of the 5,000. Or John 6, after the feeding of the 5,000, it says, when the people saw the sign that had been done, they said, this is indeed the prophet who has come into the world. So the entire crowd realizes this is the Messiah. This is the one that we've been waiting for. It's this moment where if Jesus had wanted to set up a kingdom, this was the moment. Because look what it says in verse 15. Perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force, to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Those are just three of many places you'll find this in the Gospels. Jesus' pattern was retreat in advance. Retreat in advance. Pull away to let the Father be with him and draw near him and pour into him life and love and all that he needed. And then advance the kingdom in great power. What's going on here is that the gospel writers see a pattern that we often miss. The pattern that they see is retreat and advance. We often just see advance, and so we try advance with very little retreat, and we wonder why we don't have the effectiveness and the power that Jesus did. Do you see that Jesus' power came from the retreat? He would get away to be with the Father, and then out of the overflow of what the Father did in him, he went and ministered to the world who needed him. If Jesus needed that, I'm assuming that we do as well. So Jesus sets this pattern, and it's what sends us into the main part of our sermon today. So what does it look like for us? That breathe in, breathe out, retreat, advance, gather, scatter pattern that Jesus lived with, and now he's calling us to live with, both as individuals and as a church. What does it look like? And so I want to take each of them for a few minutes. What does it look like to gather? Like, what are we doing here? What is the point of the gathering? Because some things happen here that can't happen in the scattering. And then what happens in the scattering? Because I want you to see some things happen in the scattering that can't happen in the gathering. And we need both to live the life of Jesus and to be the church that he's called us to be. So here's the quickest and the most simple way that I'm going to explain everything that I say today. We gather to be with God, and we scatter to bring God to people. You see that? That's why we need both. We gather. It's the retreat pattern of Jesus. We gather to be with God. That's the main point of today, is that we are here to be with God. We are his family, and I'm going to talk about a lot of other things that happen in as we do this. But the main reason we gather together is to be God's people who are here to be with God, to retreat and enjoy the presence of God with us and for us. We gather to be with God, and then we scatter to bring God to others. Right? We're sent out of this place, whether we like it or not. Tomorrow morning, you're going to go to a job that you may like or not like. You're going to go to a neighborhood. You're going to go to a place. And one of the things that you'll see is that this gathering and scattering, breathing in, breathing out rhythm, there were times where the church was a little bit resistant of this pattern. And in the book of Acts, guess what made them first scatter? Jesus had told them, you're going to go Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the end of the earth. The church explodes in Jerusalem. They're loving what's happening there. They're hesitant to leave. So guess what it was that actually led to the scattering? It was actually persecution, where persecution hits the church, and really they scatter, and God uses that scattering to advance the kingdom beyond anything that they really even wanted to do. Because this is the rhythm of the church. This is God's rhythm to transform the world. You're going to gather and scatter so that things will be different. So we gather to be with God. We scatter to bring others to God. Let me press into both of those. Well, let's talk about the gathering for a moment, and I'm going to spend less time here than the other one because, again, if you woke up on a Sunday morning and came to this building, I'm guessing you believe in the gathering, you're for the gathering, you're at least curious in the gathering. But what are we doing here? What is the point of big church, of Sunday morning gatherings, of worship gatherings like this? And I want to explain it by talking about 4 E's. Right? I'm a pastor who went to seminary. They only give you credit if you alliterate. So 4 E's. Why are we here? Number 1, to exalt God. Number 2, to encounter God. Number 3, to encourage each other. And number 4, to equip the saints. Right? I know that was quick. It'll be on the screen behind me. But I want to talk about those 4 reasons that we're here. We're here to exalt God. We're here to encounter God. We're here to encourage each other. And we're here to equip the saints. If we could boil down everything we do here on Sunday morning, those 4 are the primary things that we do. There are going to be a lot of other things that hopefully happen along the way, but those are the 4 we do. Let me start with exalting God. And this is something that I wish I didn't have to remind us of, but I have to remind myself of this all the time. This is primarily for God. This is not primarily for me. It's not primarily for us to like it. This is a worship service, and worship means to declare the worth of. We are here to worship God, which a lot of times we lose sight of because we get so in the way of that. A man told me a lot of times we have a hard time worshiping God because we're so good at worshiping ourselves. Right? We're here to exalt God. The right question for me to ask at the end of this service is not, did I like it? The right question is, did God like it? Did it honor him? Did it exalt him? Did it lift him high? What I feel about it, hopefully, is something that you'll come here and enjoy and like. But our primary purpose when we come here is to exalt God and to lift him high, to worship him. I had the honor and the privilege, my last year of seminary, I interned for a pastor named Chuck Swindoll up in the Dallas area. And I was with him one week as he was walking out of the service, and he's one of the most joyful, happy, loving men I've ever known. And he was walking out of the service, and a man came up to him and said, "Hey, Chuck, I didn't really like the worship today." And he stopped, and he looked dead at him with a big smile on his face, and he said, "That's okay. We weren't worshiping you." And he just turned around and kept walking with a big old smile on his face. And I thought, wow, he's still smiling, but that was dead on. Right? This is for God. This is for God. This is a place where we come together to worship him and to exalt him, because if we don't be really, really careful, we can worship ourselves so much that this becomes about what I like or don't like, not about did that exalt and lift high the name of God. Was he glorified? Was he praised? Did we say the things that he wanted us to say and not say the things that he doesn't want us to say? This is a worship service where we worship and exalt him. Right? We exalt God. This means when we worship that we come together to declare his worth no matter what. This is so important that we come together each week to declare his worth no matter what. See, I want to admit to you, I'm a pastor, and there are some weeks where I do not feel like worshiping. Right? That's not just you, or most of you. Some of you are super holy and spiritual. You always want to worship. There are weeks where I've just had a week, and I'm like, man, I think it'd be kind of nice to sit here and watch SportsCenter and drink coffee and not do that. Worship is declaring God's worth no matter what. See, when I don't feel like worshiping, that's when I need to worship the most. Because me not feeling like worship is just one more part of me worshiping myself more than I worship God. And so on the weeks where it goes great, I need to show up and say, God, thank you for all that you've done this week. I'm so grateful for the way that you provided, but you are better than anything you've given in my life. Even in the good moments, the high moments, thank you for the high moments, but you are better than the high moments. And if the high moments leave, I still worship you. And we need to come to this place in the bad moments, in the valleys, where we come together and say, God, this has been a really hard week, and there's so many things that are burdening me, but you are big, you are trustworthy. I place my life in your hands, and I worship you anyway. You're worth it. See, we're here, first of all, to exalt God. And again, I want us to come back to that often, because we're here to worship, and worship means declaring his worth no matter what. Declaring his worth and going before him and saying, this is for you. I lay down a sacrifice of praise in the times where I don't necessarily feel like praising. We're here to exalt him. Second, we're here to encounter him. We're here to encounter God. And again, I wish I didn't have to say this one. We are not here merely to talk about God. We are here to interact with God. We're not here to merely sing songs about God. We're here to sing to God and to interact with God. God wants to be present among us. And so it's important for us when we come into this place to realize we gather to encounter God. Sadly, I think a lot of us have developed a theology of a God who is distant and likes to drop into our midst sporadically. And that is not the God of the Bible. God is not distant, and he doesn't drop in sporadically. Listen to what 1 Corinthians chapter 3 says. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Do you hear what that says? I don't have to show up in the morning and say, man, I hope God shows up at church this morning. Number one, because he's present everywhere. But number two, if God lives in me, if his Spirit dwells in me, if I show up here, God's Spirit's showing up in here. If you show up filled with God's Spirit, we don't have to wonder, is God's Spirit going to show up this morning? Because we realize that's our role. But this is a building that is neutral. We're the ones that are the temples of God's Spirit. We're the ones that everywhere we go, the Spirit comes with us. And if we get this, our gatherings will become unbelievable. That you're not coming here hoping for a sporadic drop-in by God. You're coming here saying, the Spirit of God has filled me. He's with me all the time. And so when I come to a place, I'm confident that I carry God's presence with me. And if a bunch of temples get together, do you know what should happen? This place should be explosive because we carry his presence. I love that song, Holy Spirit, you're welcome here, but I always want to get up and just teach for a moment. We're not asking, please come see us. It's not a plea of, I really hope you'll show up today, God, because we're showing up. It's us saying, you are welcome here in my life. You are welcome in every part of me, and so would you flood this building with who you are? So there are moments where God shows up in a powerful moment when believers get together. We're seeking that, absolutely. We're asking for more of him. But we don't have to wonder if God's going to show up for church. We're the ones that get to step into this building and say, if anyone walks in this place, they're going to have an encounter with God because God is with me, and I believe he's given me the privilege to speak on his behalf. I believe he's given me the privilege to find people and let them know that they are loved and that they're valuable, to pray for them, to speak words of life into them. We are here to encounter God. I was a part of a lot of churches as a kid that was not the case. We talked a lot about God, but we didn't really learn to talk to God. And what we believe is that you don't need an explanation of God, you need an encounter with God. That's what we pray for over and over again, is not just an explanation of God. We're going to do our best to explain the encounters that God does in your life, but you don't need theology. You need an encounter with the living God. And so we're going to come to this place and seek to encounter God and even seek to be a part of that. That what is my role in making God's presence thick today? That I get to speak for him and act for him and be the temple of God who carries the Spirit of God with him everywhere I go. We gather to encounter God. Third, and again, hopefully this one flows out of that, we gather to encourage each other, right? We show up to this place and we should walk into this place, and it's for God, but we should walk out stronger, right? It's for God. We're worshiping him. We're exalting him. But as we walk out of this place and back into the week, we should be stronger than we were before. I got to meet a pastor in Africa a few years back in a class that I was in. He renamed his church The Garage. And we asked him, why'd you rename your church The Garage? And he said, I wanted my people to know that Sunday morning was not the main place that ministry happened. It was the main place that you pull into the garage and you get equipped so you can go back out. So come here and refuel. Come here and get what you need. But church starts Monday, and this is just the garage to prepare you for the race that you've got to run this week. You should come to this place, and this should be a place where you are encouraged by people who are running the same race that you're running. Listen to Hebrews chapter 10. It says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works. Let us consider how to stir each other up to love and to good works. The stir up language, I love it. That we come together to stir each other up. It doesn't say shake. It doesn't say grab and rattle as hard as you can. It says that every week when I come in here, I need someone to help stir me back up to love and to good works. Right? As a kid, I drank a lot of Kool-Aid. We would make the Kool-Aid. It was good when you made it, but if you let it sit in the refrigerator for a few days, what happened? All the good stuff floats to the bottom, and then you drink it, and the top part is just nasty red water, right? And so you have to stir it back up so that it tasted the way that it was supposed to taste. He's telling us, stir each other up. Right? When you get back together, remind each other of who God is. Remind each other that you're loved. And so I hope that every time you walk into this place, you'll be reminded that there's a God who loves you, regardless of what last week looked like. That you'll be reminded, not just from the stage, but from someone in this body, that God loves you, that God is using you in the world, that we're cheering for each other as we go about this life of living for God. Right? We're to encourage each other and to make sure that each other leaves this place stronger. And then finally, we gather to equip the saints for the ministry. This is a sermon we've preached I don't know how many times from Ephesians chapter 4. Some of you have been here long enough to have heard the sermon so many times. It's how Mosaic got its name. It's from Ephesians chapter 4. It lists the gifts that God gives people. And it says that the pastor, the job of the pastors is not to do ministry, is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. That the job of the church, when it is most biblical and the most effective, is not when the people that go to church put some money in the box so that the professionals do ministry. It says that a church is healthy and effective when the pastors are training the people who are the saints of the church to do the ministry in the city. And so that's what we're after, is that we be a church that equips the saints for the work of the ministry. Who is a saint? How many of you feel like a saint? A couple of you, you're like kind of confident. If you have placed your trust in Jesus, you're a saint. If a lot of you grew up Catholic, you're like, I don't know about this guy now. I know a saint biblically, it's the word holy one, right? And you are declared a saint the minute you believe, because the minute you believe, you're washed clean of all that you have done that would disqualify you from being a saint, and you are clothed with the righteousness of Jesus. You're a holy one. You are called something that you may not be yet, but you are a holy one. And Ephesians says that it's our job to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. A saint, which is you, is someone who goes into the world and does ministry. You step out into places that God has positioned you, not just to do a job and not just to go through the motions, but to do the ministry. It says the professional staff are saints who do ministry, but they're also trainers who train people for ministry. And so we believe that church is going to be a ton of fun, and church is going to be way better when we don't simply believe in this system that pays the professionals to do church things, but where there are people who train all of us to do church things, to come together, to gather, but then to be scattered back out. Mosaic has 5 full-time staff members right now, but we believe we have 200 pastors, right? 200 saints who are going out and doing the works of God and seeing this city transform, not by saying, everyone come to us, but we're going out. And then that's where we'll get into the scatter. And so we gather for those 4 reasons: to exalt God, to encounter God, to encourage each other, to equip you guys to do ministry wherever God has placed you. There's one big E that I didn't mention if you're a church person. And this is going to be the most controversial part of my sermon. So if you're dozing off, you may want to tune back in to see if you agree or disagree with this. There's one big E that I didn't mention, and it's the E, evangelize, right? I grew up in a church where those 4 were lost because every week was about evangelism. And let me say it this way: I am all for someone coming to this building and hearing the gospel and following Jesus. I'm all for evangelism. I just don't think that this hour and this platform is effective or what God has called us to do. I believe that evangelism is a part of what happens here, but I believe evangelism happens way better if we are breathed in, if we retreat and be with God, and then sent out into the places where we go encounter people who will never set foot in this room. Does that make sense? Did I say anything super heretical? Y'all still with me? I hope people come to this room. I hope a flood of people come to this room and find Christ. I think we're going to be way more effective when we don't expect that to happen and actually say, we're not going to wait for them to come to us. We're going to go to them. The Great Commission is not come to us so we can tell you about Jesus. It's go and make disciples. So we think that as we think about church, the gathering is for exalting God and encountering God, letting Him breathe us in, being brothers and sisters to each other where we encourage each other and equip each other. And then the scattering. This is where church gets beautiful. That what happens here on Sunday when God breathes us in is that He breathes us back out and He puts you in a spot where you get to go and be the church and take the things that are happening in this room, take the things that the Father is pouring into your life, and pour them on to people that would never come to us. Pour them on to people who are skeptical about Jesus and skeptical about the church, but they get to see you in the way that you go about your life, and they become curious about this thing in your life that you have that they don't. See, we gather to be with God, but we scatter to bring God to others. And I want you to see that the same 4 E's. I want you to see these. When we scatter, we're taking what happens in the retreat time. We're taking what happens in this room, and we get to share it with the world. We get to share the goodness of God and the things that we've experienced and take them out. See, we scatter to exalt God every day and everywhere. Worship an hour and a half a week, not super compelling. Worship in your workplace. Worship in your home. Worship on your good days and bad days at school. That's where people begin to sit up and take notice. And when I say that, worship doesn't mean you go and sing songs and lift your hands. Worship means you declare the worth of God at those places every day. It may involve a song. It'll probably involve you being the hardest worker at your job, the one who's doing the right thing when everyone's doing the wrong thing, the kid on campus who's looking for those who need a friend and being a friend to them, the neighbor who's seeing the people around them and saying, I've been put here on purpose, and I'm going to be breathed back out into the city to infect this place with the love of Jesus. Right? We're scattered to exalt God every day, everywhere, 24/7 worship. We get to go and be the people who bring God with us where we go. See, when we gather together, the church in one place, we're one, and it's fun and it's powerful. But when we scatter, the church is in every place. When we gather, we're in one place. When we scatter, we're in every place. Imagine that there's 150 or 200 of us in the room. Imagine the places that we're going to be this week. If you were able to track us and dot us on a map, where God is going to spread out His people to go and be the churches in those places. We scatter to exalt God. We scatter, and look at the second one, to help others encounter God. You get to go out and help other people encounter God. You get to go out and be the hands and feet of Jesus and be the one that encourages for Jesus and speaks for Jesus. We carry God's presence with us everywhere we go. One of the things that the New Testament writers were blown away by was that the people are now the temple of God. That Jesus says the physical temple in Israel gets destroyed, and he's saying it's okay because I'm going to raise up a new temple. Not just Jesus, but he's saying the people now get to carry the presence of God everywhere they go. So this is a mobile temple. It's a temple that's going to spread out and infect the world with the love of Jesus. We scattered to help others encounter God. Listen to what 2 Corinthians 5 says, that he has entrusted to us the message of reconciliation. God has entrusted to you the message of reconciliation. Reconciliation means to be brought back together. That God, in his plan to redeem and to renew the world, has entrusted to me and to you the message of reconciliation. That Jesus came and died that we may be brought back together, sinful people and a holy God. And the reason I emphasize that is I think there's a lot of you who think that speaking on behalf of God is presumptive. I don't think speaking on behalf of God is presumptive. I think it's obedience. Right, that you get to speak the message of God to the people that are around you, to go into the city and to speak as ambassadors. It says, therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. Most people that I talk to, not just in church, but outside of church, believe that if there is a God, he is distant and he is silent. And the more that I've thought about that, and the more that it's frustrated me, the more this verse keeps popping in my mind. And if God has chosen to make us the people that speak for him and act for him, and we are silent, and we are ineffective, the only choice left for the world is to think that God is silent. It is us stepping into this role and saying, this isn't presumptive. God has invited me into a role where I get to speak for him and act for him and draw near to him so that he can send me back out. When we begin to learn what it looks like to be ambassadors, to help others encounter God, the world will be transformed by believers who step out and get to speak and act on behalf of God. Number 3, we scatter to encourage people far from God. So I love encouragement in this room. But when we step out into the world, we step out into the world of the broken and the needy and the lost. And if you've ever just stopped and asked someone how their day is going, and then actually just stopped and actually let them answer that question, you'll find that most of our world is broken and lost and needy, yet they've learned to put on this brave face and step out into the world. And we get to step out and do what Jesus did. One of the things I love about Jesus is how much he loved being called a friend of sinners. How much he loved pursuing the lost and leaving the 99 for the one. It was really the way that he lived his life. Was I'm going to step out, and the person who's the furthest from God, I'm going to go after and speak encouragement to. So this week, again, if there's 150 of us in here, and we went into the world and each decided to encourage one person just on the weekdays, I'll give you the weekend off. Right? Close to 1,000 people, right, would be encouraged just in 1 week of us deciding, I'm going to encourage one person every day. I'm just going to speak some words of life to them and see what God does with that. See, he sends us out. He breathes us out to encourage people who are far from God. And then finally, he breathes us out. We scatter to engage in ministry. And I'll just emphasize this one more time before I close. God is not looking for you to come to a church and watch other people do ministry. He's not asking you to come to a church and watch people do ministry. It's lame and it's weak. He wants you to do ministry. He's given you passions that no one else has. He's given you the eyes to see a place in our world that doesn't look like heaven and to not be okay with it. Do not deaden that. He's given you gifts that no one else has. He's given you a position in the world that no one else has. See, we scatter to engage in ministry, and what I want to urge you is that there's fear in that. Right? There's fear in thinking about scattering and going into our neighborhood and our job. There's uncertainty of going from sitting in pews to actually going and saying, you know what, I'm going to step into a place that I don't really know what it looks like and engage for Jesus and for the gospel and let him use me in these places that he's positioned me. But what I've discovered is that most of the time, the places that I feel fear are Satan trying to keep me from something that is good for me and for the people around me. That the only weapon that Satan still has for you as a believer is fear. The only thing he can do to you is put thoughts in your mind about if I go talk to that person, they're going to think I'm crazy, or I'm not going to have the right words to say. And I want you to begin to listen to and to lean into your fears, because you have passions, you have things that God has placed on your heart where he's saying the world doesn't look like heaven here, and I've positioned you here to make it look like it. But in order to do that, you're going to have this other voice in your head that says, you're going to fail. Don't try it. You're going to look like an idiot. Don't try it. And you're going to have to face and step into your fears and say, you know what? I'm going to step in to do what God's called me to do. And I would tell you 99% of the time where I step into a fear, I realize that it was Satan trying to hold me back for something that was good for me and for the people around me. There's fears that you have to face to engage in your ministry. And so breathe in, breathe out. Inhale and exhale, retreat and advance, gather, scatter. This is God's rhythm for us. And this morning, as we do this series, we want to recommit ourselves to it. We are not okay with the or models of church. I'm not okay with a church that gathers in a big group and then that church is over and we just kind of go back to normal life. I'm not okay with that. I love the gathering, but this is a place where we're drawn together, and the things that happen in this room with us and our God are then propelling us into the rest of the week. I'm also not okay with churches that scatter and don't gather. Right? I love this time. And what just happened when we sing How Great Thou Art, right? You can't get that anywhere else. Like, this is so valuable to us that we gather together and be a family and then get sent back into the lives that God has positioned us into. And in order to do that, again, the whole point of this series, we've got to embrace the and. Right? That both of these are important. Both of these are valuable. We need both. We need to gather with God and go to church. We need to scatter for God and bring other people to Him and be the church. And we need you, right? And hopefully you see that you need us. This is how church is supposed to happen. That we realize we're a family who needs each other, that you need us and we need you. And so I want to close. I want to give 3 specific calls to action this morning. Then we'll worship a little bit more. Number 1, I want to call you to commit yourself to Jesus. Maybe recommit yourself to Jesus. A lot of times, because of how church has hurt people, they walk away from Jesus altogether. I did it for a while. I loved Jesus, but I was hurt by church, and so I just walked away from it all. And there was a moment when I was in college where thankfully Jesus grabbed me again. And I got to see who He was. I got to see the beauty of Jesus and the way that He loved me and the way that He lived His life. And I'll never forget, I was hired at a Christian sports camp. I was a counselor for 8- and 9-year-old little boys. And I was reading with them devotionals through the Gospel of John. And I was reading in John chapter 2, and back to back there are these stories, one where He turns water into wine, and we were talking about how weird that was and how powerful it is that God can do those things. Then the next devotional was about Jesus, and He goes into the temple, and He sees the money changers in the temple, and He flips over tables, and He says that He makes a whip and drives people out of it. And I remember reading that, and I'd heard that story as a kid, but for some reason it just resounded with me. And I began to realize this is God showing me who He is and what He's like. Then I read on and read a story about Him calling Himself friend of sinners. And something clicked in me. Because at that point in my life, I knew that I was a really good sinner. Right? I knew that He loved me, but my understanding of God's love is He tolerates me and doesn't kill me when He could. Right? Not He delights in me as a son. And something clicked in me, and the little 8- and 9-year-old little boys thought I was insane. Because I was reading them devotionals and just bawling. And here I am, a 21-year-old college student, just weeping because for the first time, the stories of Jesus became real for me. And I recommitted myself to Him. I was baptized when I was 7. But when I was 21, I came back and said, Jesus, I believe that You are who You say You are. And I believe that You died and were resurrected to wash me from my sins, but also to give me abundant life, and I want that. And so I recommitted myself to Jesus. And for some of you this morning, that may need to happen. Or you may be in this place where you're far from Jesus, but still coming to church. And I would tell you, run back to Jesus. See, the reason that I began to love church was because I love Jesus. I started following Jesus, and I realized that Jesus called the church His bride. And I still had issues and problems and frustrations, and 20 years later, I still do. But I realized that Jesus called the church His bride, and I was going to choose to use my life serving the bride of Christ, not fighting against the bride of Christ. And so commit yourself to Jesus, but number 2, commit yourself to the local church. Right? There's some of you who are Christians, and you've used the argument, I love Jesus, but I don't like the church. And I feel that. Like, it makes sense to me. A lot of people have been hurt by local churches. But do you see that Jesus has chosen His bride, the church, even when she's crazy? She's His bride. And He's going to use us. Despite our flaws, despite our failures, despite our brokenness. He's saying, I want to use a family like this of broken people who come together in humility, but in boldness to say, we want to be your family. We want to be the people You've created us to be. So for some of you, I'm calling you to recommit yourself to a local church. There's a couple dates that I want to put up on the screen. We're having a members class here in a few weeks. And there's some of you who have flown under the radar for a while. This may be a great time for you to join Mosaic. And what joining Mosaic is formally saying, I'm in, and I want brothers and sisters involved in my life. Before you become a member, we try to reach out to you. You fill out a Connect card. We're going to reach out to you and invite you into stuff, but we try to keep this distance of some people don't want us coming on too strong, and we're going to give them their distance. But we want you to know there's this line that you cross where you say, this is my church, and these are my people, and I want all in. So some of you need to commit yourself to the church, the gathering. Then the third thing is this: commit yourself to the church scattered. Right? Not just coming to a place like this. This is an awesome part of church. But I want you to commit yourself to the scattered church. And really that's where you understanding and you seeking God and saying, God, what have you made me passionate about that doesn't look like heaven that I can pour my life into? God, what gifts have you given me? What jobs have you given me? What positions in a neighborhood have you given me? You have put me in a spot that isn't random, but you've put me somewhere to make an impact on this world. Ephesians 2:10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in. What that says is not only did God prepare you for it, he prepared the good work for you, and it's waiting for you. So what does it look like to scatter? One of the things that I want to invite you into is the second date that's on that slide, our microchurch leaders, our microchurch meeting. Our microchurches are ways that we scatter as a church. And right now there are 7 or 8 of them. We're hoping that eventually there's hundreds of them. Because again, our philosophy and the way that we think we're going to reach the city is not by just saying the doors are open, come see us. But it's by individual believers seeing, man, I'm in a neighborhood that really no one else is in. And how can I use that to invite my neighbors in and show them the love and the beauty of Christ? I'm in a workplace or a dorm, all these places that God has scattered us. We sat down last year at the merger. In our 10-year goal, we decided we needed a target to shoot for. So 10 years from now, what do we want to see happen? And after a few days of praying through it and seeking through it, the elders came up with this statement that our 10-year target is that every door, dorm, and social network in Nacogdoches would be reached. Every door, neighborhood, dorm, SFA's campus, and social network of Nacogdoches would be reached. And I think even when we wrote it, we read it and thought, that seems way too big. That every neighborhood, every door, like every single house in Nacogdoches, that we would take ownership, that we want to know them and love them and connect with them. The entire campus that every year turns over with a new group of students. And every social network, all the different places, the different groups of people that hang together. But we read it and we said, man, that's our target. We're going to shoot that our people will not just come to church, but that we get to go be a church. And so where you come into this, we have microchurches. And when we start a microchurch, the question we ask is, who are you trying to reach? We have some that are trying to reach specific age groups. We have some that are trying to reach a neighborhood. I had a man who came to me last year jokingly and said, hey, I watched Monday Night Football with a group of guys. Could that be my microchurch? And I said, absolutely. It means that you engage and you pray for those guys and you realize God has given you a circle of people that he wants you to pour your life into. So I want you to begin to pray. And if you're curious about microchurches, either to join one or we're constantly praying that people will start one. I'd love for you to come to that meeting. It's on August 21st here in a few weeks. Again, we'll plug you into ones that already exist. Or if you've had a burden on your heart to say, man, I'm in a place in this city where I'm scattered, but I need help and I need some encouragement to reach. And we want to partner with you in that. So will you stand with me? I want to pray for us. Then we'll sing one more song and scatter this morning. Father, again, we thank you for breathing life into us. We are alive because you put together a clump of dirt and breathed life in so that we weren't just physically alive, but you have sent your spirit to breathe that we may be spiritually alive. Would you, even in these last few minutes of the service, would you breathe us back in? As we come to this place, would you bring us back to the feet of Jesus? To find life, to find love, to find the encouragement we need. And then, Father, as we leave this place today, would you breathe us back out into the city? As we go to the places where we're already positioned, would we begin to see that maybe those aren't as random as they seem, that you have a plan, and that you've placed us in these spots to be your church, to go and to scatter, and to share the greatest news in the world, the good news of who you are and what you've done for us. So would you give my brothers and sisters boldness? Would you give them courage as they begin to wrestle with what it looks like, not just to gather, but to scatter? Would you give us vision? Would you give us courage, excitement, boldness to step back out of this place? We want to see Nac look more like heaven. And so, Father, we believe we are sent. And, Father, we believe that as individuals, you want to breathe us back in and use us this week.